They have to use ferries. It could take hours to load your things on the ferries and then move across and then unload the ferry on the other side. The increase in economic activity between the two sides of this river is actually increasing prosperity for all the people. This is beside exporting things, besides the economic activity that comes from other aspects of the development aid. It just helps the people that are there, which I think is remarkable.
So, Jason, I think what's important to understand here is the different approach between China and the United States. And I always like to link it back to that analogy of if you give a man a fish, you feed him for a day, but if you teach a man how to fish, you're going to feed him for a lifetime. And it's different because if you look specifically at the continent of Africa, the United States actually does provide a lot of aid to Africa. A lot of what that means is a lot of it is, for example, we'll go and we'll deliver water. We will deliver, food. We will deliver, we'll go and bring a team of doctors there and they'll do some minor surgeries, whether it's on eyes or maybe cleft lip surgery, things like that. These are all positive things that the United States is certainly doing, and there's a lot of aid that is going. But it's more looked at as kind of like a charity. You know what? We're going to just go ahead and donate this stuff. We're going to donate a couple $100 million worth of aid to Africa. They need our help. Here's some help. There you go. Now, the problem is that obviously water, food, surgery, these are great things, but they're all very temporary. And once that is out, it's out. And then guess what? You're way back where you started, and now you're going to need more water, and you're going to need more food. And so I think what's interesting is that over the term, the United States historically has neglected a very large part of the world. You mentioned it earlier, the global south. Well, the global south, for people that don't know, this is basically everybody outside of, the Western allies of the United States. So, we're not talking, basically U.S., Canada, and the European Union, sprinkling Japan, Australia, and New Zealand. That's basically the West. And everywhere else is the global south. Well, interesting enough, that other part, the global south, is actually around 88% of the world's population. So a better term for that would probably be the global majority, because that's really what is being addressed here. So we're looking at the entire regions of Latin America, Africa, the Middle East, Southeast Asia. These are countries that are not represented in this Western bloc, and historically they have been neglected by the United States and Western allies. So this is where China has come in, and they've done a very interesting thing. One of the amazing things is that when you look at a very tiny country, let's just say the Solomon Islands, okay? The Solomon Islands, very tiny country. The United States has historically had zero interest in developing diplomacy, diplomatic relations. We have no interest in the Solomon Islands at all. So much to the fact that, for example, on the Solomon Islands, there's still a lot of landmines and a lot of bombs left over from World War II. And we're talking 80 years later, there's still people dying in the Solomon Islands because they accidentally step on a landmine or they step on an old bomb that's 80 years old. And this was a party that said, hey, come in here, clean up all this garbage, and the United States government's like, it's not that important to us. It's so low on the priority list, it's never going to get back. But this is where China comes in and sees an opportunity. So it doesn't matter if you're a major economy, let's say Germany, or you're the Solomon Islands. If you are the Prime Minister of Solomon Islands, or you are the Prime Minister of Germany, or the Chancellor, as they call it in Germany, and you fly to Beijing for a diplomatic meeting, you're getting the same treatment. You're getting the red carpets being rolled out. You're going to have the official diplomatic welcome. And that is a very stark difference between the United States and China. So China is really treating all countries, regardless of their size, whether they're super tiny Solomon Islands in the Asia-Pacific region, or if they're a big country like Germany, you're basically getting the same treatment. In addition to that, China is seeing this as an opportunity, saying, look, Africa is a very large untapped resource. It is absolutely, arguably the wealthiest continent in the world, given its incredible amount of resources. Now, does China want those resources? Of course they do. Of course they're interested in, building and gaining access to all these minerals and things. For example, you look at the EV industry that China is absolutely dominant in. Now, so many of those, the zinc and the cobalt and all the minerals and metals that are required to make an EV battery. Well, many of them come from Africa, and China is building these relationships to get access to that, and that is why they built this incredible supply chain. So what's happening is they're building roads, they're building airports, and now all of a sudden these African countries and smaller cities, they have a chance to get out. Right? They have a chance to break that cycle of poverty, and that's going back to the analogy of teaching a man to fish, because now all of a sudden you have a road, you have an airport, you have a port. Now you can start actually making products, you can start exporting things, you can actually legit run a business, as opposed to just being in the middle of nowhere with no access to the outside world. How are you going to develop? How are you going to break that cycle of poverty? And so that's a very different model, I think, between the United States and China, one that is often overlooked. And I just want to go back to your last comment where you said this debt trap diplomacy. This is kind of the three biggest words you'll hear from Western news outlets in regards to the BRI. But the lady from Johns Hopkins, Deborah Brodiger, Dr. Deborah Brodiger, she wrote an amazing article, and she's been very clear on that. This is just wrong. There's absolutely zero evidence to suggest this, and there's no, like you said, there's never been a single incident in the 12 years of the Belt and Road Initiative that China's ever taken over an asset because somebody's defaulted on their loan. So it's not some predatory scheme from China for them to, they're going to come in and we're going to give you a loan. Well, guess what? You can't repay it, but we're taking over everything in your country. We're going to dominate you now. That's just not China. That's not how their foreign policy works, and I just wanted to establish that fact. But that is kind of the overall difference between the United States and China and their approach to foreign policy, JC.
Welcome to My Stories of Chinese Characters, Season 2. I'm Uncle Heinz. This season, we will travel to different destinations and experience the different scenes throughout the year. This season, we will taste delicious foods.
Delicious, how sure?
Feel the delicacy of Chinese silk.
Some people say that this is the world's first computer, because each one of these is an instruction.
And enjoy the local architectures.
Yes, it's a big house. Changzhou's.
We will feel a sense of camaraderie on the slow train. And feel the excitement of the snowfields. I'm Uncle Hans. This season, we will take you to see a different China from the perspective of Chinese characters. Meet us on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, iHeartRadio, and other major podcast platforms, or on our website, radio.cgtn.com.
You're listening to The Break.
I want to add to what you said, because everything you touched upon, I think, is completely correct, but there's also other pieces that we can add to the way in which China is facilitating development in these countries. So one of the things that China really has emphasized is development of power. And a lot of that has been hydropower, but also fossil fuel emitting, mediums. Up until about 2018, 2019, now it's pretty much all solar and hydro and wind and so forth. But what really that facilitates is in-house development of finished products. So factories there in those countries. For the last several hundred years, under colonialism from Europe and then to some degree the United States, we have been taking resources from those countries, developing them in our countries, and then selling them back at a considerably marked up price. But now a lot of developing countries are finishing the products themselves in-house and then exporting those finished products to the rest of the world. Now, another thing, that in a way that China benefits from having all of these countries have these roads and ports and airports, seaports, land bridges, rail, all of this stuff, is that China, as these countries become more economically prosperous, they also want to import and buy a lot of advanced goods. Guess where most of the stuff in the world is made? China. So China is developing their economies to create a middle class to buy Chinese goods. So China is importing their goods and exporting goods. It's a win-win. It's a win for the developing country, who has a more prosperous country, and they have a much more powerful economy, and people are better off. Quality of life is improving, and China is able to sell them goods. Recently, there was I think this is by David Gold. Yeah, I think that may be his name. He showed that actually just recently, Chinese exports to the developing world have outpaced to the developed world. So we're primarily talking about the G7. So the developing world is now buying more Chinese products than the G7 is, which basically means, like, if the United States wants to put 104% tariffs on Chinese EVs, it doesn't hurt China that bad, because China can still sell those EVs in Europe and in Africa and in the Middle East and South America and all these other places. So increasingly, like, some of the trade war stuff that's happening is not affecting China in the same way that the United States, I think, some of the leaders in Washington were hoping it was going to. I also think the United States benefits immensely from the Belt and Road Initiative. So because all of these developing countries now have economies that want to import things, guess what? They want to import Marvel movies too. So American products are also going to be popular in these developing economies. So China, by helping develop the underdeveloped world, is benefiting Europe, it's benefiting the United States. So Americans are benefiting from the Belt and Road Initiative inadvertently, indirectly, by the global economy becoming larger and becoming more powerful. So I really don't understand always why the United States is like, no, you should only just trade with us. We're your only buddy. When these developing countries trade with more partners, that creates more economic activity, which benefits everyone. Another thing about, you mentioned the United States likes to send waters, food, and that kind of aid. Absolutely it does. And, China does that too, but China actually doesn't do it unless there's an emergency usually. China, for example, there was a volcano erupted in Tonga 2019, I want to say. I might have the exact year wrong. But China sent 2 ships full of aid. Water, power generators, tents, sleeping bags, food, etc. China does that too, but primarily around, some sort of what do they call it in the insurance business? Act of God. So there'll be some earthquake or some volcano, and so China jumps to that. But in terms of the rest of its development aid, oftentimes it takes the form of aid that develops, going along with your teach a man to fish metaphor.
No, absolutely. And I think that's what you're seeing right now, Jason, with the United States and with China, is that there's just a different approach. And, the United States, they very much are wanting to be that global hegemonic power. They really want to make sure that they can go back and maintain that unipolar world. And in the United States, it always comes down to this, is the fact that you'll hear this being preached that, well, the United States, we have the values, right? We have we're based on the rules-based, the rules-based order. We're in the rule of democracy. And if you follow our lead, that's going to be a more safer and a better, system for the world. And, the world is better when America leads. We've actually taken that policy even further where, our Secretary of State, famously, our former Secretary of State, Michael Pompeo, he said, the best policy for Europe, the best foreign policy for Europe is an American first policy. Because if America's first, then you guys will be better. And the issue with this is that, what we're seeing in real time is we're seeing a very big issue with this because of what's happening, for example, on the battlefield in Ukraine. For example, because Europe relies heavily on America for security, right? There's always, it's kind of a double-edged sword for Europe. In one sense, your security partner is the United States. Well, that's a great security partner, right? We have the biggest military in the world. We spend trillions of dollars on it every year. If you're Germany and France, it's great that you know that you have the United States, backing you, and that no one's going to military invade you because the U.S. has your back. That's great. But in exchange for that, you now sacrifice some of your freedom. Because, for example, when the United States was pushing Ukraine towards NATO membership, at the time, France and Germany's, leadership both said, look, we don't think this is good for us, but guess what? The United States says, I don't care what you think. This is what we want. You're following along. So now you have to go against your best interest, and you have to please the United States. And again, it's everything is, as long as America's first, as long as America's the best, this is what's going to happen. We're actually seeing this play out in real time when we're looking at Russia and China. So, Vladimir Putin just traveled to Beijing 2 weeks ago. They have issued a very big